I'll be happy to introduce Evelyn. We're happy to have her from the PJM connection that was founded in 1927. It ensures the reliability of high voltage electric power across systems serving 65 million people in several states in DC. The PJM coordinates and directs the operation of the region's transmission grid. Evelyn is the managing partner for state government affairs, and she helps develop and maintain effective relationships with consumer advocates and public interest groups across the region. She has forged a working relationship with consumer advocates, environmental organizations, and public interest groups to ensure that they are effectively apprised of issues and developments. Prior to joining PJM, she was the manager of government affairs with Green Mountain Energy Company, where she led the regulatory effort as Green Mountain successfully provided cleaner energy to a region in the largest governmental aggregation in the country at the time. Before her career in the utilities industry, she served as the Assistant Consumers Counsel for almost 17 years with the Ohio Consumers Council. She earned her Bachelor of Science from the University of Montevallo in Alabama, earned her Juris Doctorate from the Ohio State University College of Law. She's a member of the National Bar Association, the Columbus Bar Association, and the American Association of Blacks in Energy. She also serves on the board of advisors for the Institute for Regulatory Policy Studies at Illinois State and the advisory committee for the Energy Executive Course at the University of Idaho. Thank you for joining us today, Evelyn.
Hey, thank you so very much for having me here. I want to be clear at the outset that even though I grew up in Alabama, I'm really a Buckeye through and through. I am not an Auburn Tiger, and I do not roll Tide. So just want to make sure that we get that all set together. And I really want to thank this organization for this invitation to share some information about PJM. I have 20 minutes to talk about PJM, and I just want you to know the introductory course to PJM is a 6-hour course. So I am really nailing it down to what I'm calling the bare brass knuckles here. So let me just, would you go to slide 1, please? Gwen, I think that's slide 2. Oh, okay, good. It's fine. I think I must have kicked off a slide, but let's roll with that one. So let's talk about the power delivery. So Gwen just talked about PJM. So PJM is a regional transmission organization. We provide electricity in 13 states, parts of all 13 states and DC, including all of Ohio. This figure here is where you see that PJM has some responsibility, some portion of the infrastructure responsibility. I heard Dale talking a lot about what is going on in the energy business, and I think that what I will talk about here will build upon it. This diagram basically tells you how the power grid functions. Electricity is generated and it is transmitted across the high voltage transmission line, and then it is distributed to substations where the local Ohioans utilities distribute it to consumers. So PJM doesn't provide any utility or electricity to the individual end-use consumers. We just oversee the transmission and generation of power. That's what we call the bulk electric power system. Next slide, please. So here we are. So PJM is part of the Eastern Interconnection. I think Gwen just shared a number of the key statistics of what we do there. Key and what we're very proud of is the number of customers that we serve. 65 million plus customers, and it's growing. PJM serves a lot of big load centers, including Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Newark, New Jersey, Columbus, Ohio. We serve Columbus, Ohio, and Chicago. Some really big load centers that are right there in the middle of the PJM service territory. The one important point about this being part of the Eastern Interconnection is that there are other regional transmission organizations that are also part of the Eastern Interconnection. That means we can share resources in the midst of emergency. For example, in the midst of Winter Storm Elliott, back in December, we were able to share power with one of our neighbors, and they shared power with us to make sure that we maintain the reliability of the system. So we are very much interconnected with the Eastern Interconnection. The Eastern Interconnection also goes all the way up to Canada. Next slide, please. I should probably, Gwen also indicated that PJM began in 1927 as a power pool. And this document actually talks about when we had most of our transmission owners join. So American Electric Power, which folks, if you live in the Columbus area, you probably get your power from them. They joined in 2004. You can see there on this chart. And if you were to live in a bigger part of a larger part of the Ohio area, such as Cleveland, Toledo, Akron, you might be served most likely by First Energy Company. First Energy is in what we call the at-sea zone. They joined in 2011. Next slide, please. While Gwen is turning to the next slide, I just want to say that PJM is a public utility. Now, we operate under the regulation and under the authority of the Federal Power Act, so we are regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We are also effectively a nonprofit, which you can see right now. We operate on a profit neutral basis. So we're actually very much mission oriented. Our mission is clear: to ensure the reliable delivery of the bulk electric system and keep costs affordable for the 65 million people we serve. The other thing that I want to highlight here is that PJM is not a publicly traded company. We do not have any shareholders, and we do not have any concerns around earnings for the bottom line. You might hear earnings report from the various utility companies. We will not have that. So we really want to emphasize that we are very much different from the AEPs of the world and the First Energies of the world, even though First Energy and AEP are members of PJM. Next slide, please. So reliability. PJM has one primary focus, and that is the reliability of the bulk power system. As we like to say, if the lights aren't on, nothing else matters. You know, you're not going to really care about whether I have a markets operation or a regional planning if the lights aren't on. So that reliability is job one at PJM. So all of these things that you see here, markets operation, regional planning, they go to make sure that we have, they point toward the reliability functionality. Let's talk about markets first. Markets really, we have three kinds of markets in PJM: energy, capacity, and ancillary markets. When you're thinking about PJM's markets, you will think about it kind of like a stock market. You know, that you're buying and selling and making sure that the energy gets where it needs to get, and making sure that there is enough energy to be gotten there. When you think about operations, you're thinking about something like the air traffic controllers. We like to call ourselves the air traffic controllers of the energy, of the bulk power system. We make sure that electricity is transmitted to wherever it needs to be in the right amount of voltage, so that the lines are properly maintained and not being overloaded, so that we can keep the system reliable. So when you turn the switch on, we make sure that the power is there on any given day. We do that on a second by second basis, a 60 gigahertz kind of basis, to make sure that the power remains reliable. So a regional planning outlook is the third stool of that reliability panel that we're showing here. What we do is every year we take a 15-year outlook to say, what is the load forecast? What's load doing in Columbus, Ohio? What are we seeing load do in Baltimore? And how is it growing? How is it changing? We do all of that to make sure that we have a good and accurate account of what we're looking for. We call that kind of like an urban planner, somebody who's keeping the streets and the cities, making sure that the cities are properly planned to make sure that the population gets what it needs when it's needed and how it's needed. Next slide, please, Gwen. So that is just kind of what I was talking to you. This is another graphic depiction of what I was just mentioning. And PJM is an urban planner and an air traffic controller, and that's like a stock market. We really like this slide. It really puts it into really good graphics for you to understand what we're all trying to do. But remember, these three roles are all designed to make sure that we maintain the reliability of the bulk electric system, to make sure that power is delivered reliably and cost effectively to the 65 million people that we serve. Next slide, please. The value proposition. PJM is huge. I think you saw that. You know, in slide one, we indicated that we have over 185,000 megawatts of generating capacity in PJM. That is massive. Typically, you will hear words like PJM is the largest organized market in the world. That's because our generating capacity is massive. Our transmission line numbers are are very, very strong, very, very strong. And so we really do have a vast value proposition. The scale of the PJM system provides tremendous value for grid reliability. This value proposition ultimately ends up giving all of our 65 million customers a gross benefit of about $3.2 to $4 billion a year. And friends, that is a lot of money. Now, this value proposition slide will tell you how it's broken down, but it's really boiling down to the fact that PJM is large enough and we have such a scale that we can use it to make sure that customers are getting a great big bang for their bucks, and they're being benefited by the very existence of PJM and how we operate our markets and how we do our urban planning and how we do our air traffic controlling, those three leg functions that I just talked about earlier. PJM is really able to save customers $3.2 to $4 billion a year, and that includes folks in Ohio. Thank you. Next slide, please. So let's talk about this. So I think, when I came into the webinar, I heard the Farm Bureau talk a little bit about some of the, the issues regarding permitting, some of the very issues around the shale. So what are we seeing here? We are very much at a very critical time in the electric industry. As with the entire United States, PJM has experienced an accelerated transition towards intermittent resources. So as we're doing that, that means that the grid is getting cleaner as you're going forward. And it doesn't really matter whether you like renewable energy or whether you like thermal generation. It is actually just a matter of fact. When we look at the policies, the economics, and the consumer choices, they're all moving towards renewables and away from what we would call dispatchable emitting generation resources. And those would include things like coal, like gas. And there's sometimes there's a little bit of a move away from nuclear, even though they are not an emitting resource. So there's some really interesting things going on in the energy industry right now. I indicated just a moment ago that PJM has over 185,000 megawatts of generating capacity, and that is kind of evenly broken down between, it's mostly gas. There's a little bit of, the next largest is coal and then nuclear, and not a huge amount of renewable. But when you look at our queue, and the queue indicates how much capacity is coming online. The generating queue is that which says, I really want to connect to the PJM system and I want to provide some generating resources to the PJM consumers in the upcoming years. So that's kind of what the queue is. So when you look at our queue, you will see that our queue has about 225,000 megawatts in that queue. And most of that is solar, wind, some storage, some batteries. There's very limited amounts of any thermal generation that is in our queue. And that is raising some really interesting questions for us. Now, certainly PJM is agnostic as to what kind of fuel or what kind of resources we will use to generate the electricity that will serve the 65 million customers. But we've made some real serious studies. We've undertaken a number of studies over the last couple of years. And what we are learning is that the electricity demand is likely to increase. When you think about Columbus, Ohio, and I don't know how many of you are in the Columbus, Ohio area, but right outside of New Albany, we have data centers. Intel is one of them. Those data centers are located right out there in that pocket, and that is increasing the electric demand in this area significantly. And obviously, it is a topic that we're going to have to address. I will just give you an aside here. We have right in Northern Virginia, we have what we call Data Center Alley. We believe it is the largest grouping of data centers in the world. And the electric demand in that area has gone extremely high. We are working right now to determine how best to serve the customers and the electricity needs as those data centers continue to grow. While we don't necessarily know that the Columbus, Ohio, New Albany area will grow to that extent, we certainly know that we're going to have to do something to make sure that electricity demand are being met. So another thing is that we know is because of that. I've listed here some of our reliability concerns. So we have bucketed these we have bucketed the reliability concerns into three portions. We call it the near term, the mid-term, and the long-term reliability. In the near term, we want to say that we have enough resources and essential reliability services today, but they need to perform. Back in December, if any of you guys remember Winter Storm Elliott, and I'll bring that up again and again, we came, our resources were very tight in PJM. When we looked at our forecast and we looked at the actual generating capacities that should have been online, we should have been able to move through Winter Storm Elliott without it being tight at all. But such was not the case. During Winter Storm Elliott, about 42,000 megawatts of generating resources did not show up when they were supposed to. That is a problem. Now we need to make sure that those resources will show up when they need to. And that way we will make sure that we're working to maintain the reliability of the system. In the midterm, so Dale and the Farm Bureau were talking about some of the shale and the Utica and the Marcellus and all of the shale gas and the plants that were shuttering. Well, we are seeing in PJM as a whole that resource retirements and load growth could potentially outpace new entry. And by new entry, meaning those things that are in the queue, we think the resource retirements and the load growth could be bigger than what they are doing, what the renewables are coming online. We're seeing that we have a lot of renewables, but they're not coming online quite as quickly. And even those that are coming online, they're not actually coming online. So they get through our interconnection queue process. They sign the agreement, but they don't go into commercial operation. We have about 44,000 megawatts of renewable generations that have gone through our whole approval process, and they're ready to, we say, hey, you can connect to the grid and you can connect thus and so and here. And these renewable generation resources have not yet connected. That's 44,000 megawatts as of a couple of weeks ago. And we're hearing some interesting reasons why they're not connected. One is financing, some is supply chain, and then others is just other. Another thing that we're keeping our eye on, and this is coming directly from my vice president of planning, is that there are some folks who enter the queue who never have any intentions of ever becoming commercial operations, but it certainly ties up resources because we have to study whatever is in our queue. So we'll work with our federal regulators to make some changes that I will not have time to get into right now. But anyway, that is one of the risks right now. Resource retirements and load growth could be outpaced by the pace of the new entry, and that might be a problem. In the long term, we're worried about having enough resources and having essential reliability for those resources. And what is an essential reliability? Thermal resources, dispatchable generation also provides some ramping and some dispatchable essential kinds of reliability attributes that are not there with renewables. For example, I can't tell the sun to shine. I can't tell the wind to blow. So I can't yet dispatch it right now. So we need these thermal generators to provide some of these essential service and to provide an adequate supply until a substitute, and that's generally a technology kind of substitute, is deployed at scale. I think all of you know that a megawatt of gas is not the same as a megawatt of solar. You need about 2 or 3 megawatts of solar to equal 1 megawatt of gas or thermal generator. So those are some of the really tough issues that we are grappling with right now in the PJM stakeholder process and trying to make sure that we maintain the reliability of the system. Next slide, please. So I want to talk real briefly here about the building blocks of reliability. I'm hoping that what you've taken away from me today is a portion of this. So in order for PJM to operate reliably, we have to have an adequate supply. Generally speaking, we have called that iron in the ground. I'm not sure if you call it iron in the ground right now. I don't know if that's politically correct, given that, some of it is above the ground, and then some of it is above the building, with respect to solar batteries and wind. But you got to have enough resources that will be there to meet the demand. When Dan turns on his light, he wants to make sure that there's something behind that switch, so that when that switch is flipped, the lights will come on. Dan doesn't want to hear that, no, it's not flowing today. Because at that point, Dan's going to be calling everybody he can to say, where's my electricity? So adequate supply is important. Another thing that's really important is accurate forecasting. Projecting what the customer demands and the system demands is a very technical job, and I'm glad it's one that I do not have to do it. We have a very exciting team that is dealing with load forecasting. There was a presentation on it yesterday to a group of state commissioners and other organizations. But the point is that we're trying to make sure that we know what the cities are doing with electrification requirements. As you all know, all throughout the PJM footprint, all throughout the country, there are cities and counties and towns and all kinds of municipalities that are saying, I want this for electrification. This is what I'm expecting for the EVs. This is what I want for my building. And all of that needs to be incorporated in the load forecast for PJM, so that we can make sure that we are procuring enough resources to meet the demand, so that when Dan hit that switch, it will go up. Robust transmission. Now, this is always just a tough topic. Nobody wants transmission built there. It used to be NIMBY, not in my backyard, but now I hear it's bananas. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anyone. So I don't know how you get the renewables. If you want renewables, you got to build some transmission. So it's a really kind of interesting scenario. PJM, unlike some of the other RTO, our loads pockets, our major load centers are generally like they're big, and a lot of them are pretty close to others. So we don't need like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles of transmission like other companies do. But transmission is expensive, and nobody really wants to pay for transmission, and nobody wants it in their yard. So permitting the transmission and permitting the construction of any of this is always an issue. And then reliable operations. I don't actually know how many people are on this call, but certainly PJM has what we call our control room. That control room has all of the generating facilities and all of the transmission lines that are in our footprint on a board. Anytime I go into that control room, my eyes always light up. It tells you whether the lines are green, which everything is good, and it tells you yellow if you got, which means that there might be a little bit of problem developing, and you don't want to see any red on it, because that means it's a trouble. But I want to, at this point, give a shout out to our operations team, because during Winter Storm Elliott, when all of those resources were shrinking and they were tight and they were not getting much notice, that team at PJM stood up and made sure that the lights were remained on for all of the 65 million customers in the PJM footprint. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody locally didn't have a weather problem, but the bulk system remained reliable for the entire time. And those are the building blocks of reliability. When, let me see if there's one more slide, and I'm basically out of time, but let's see if there's one more. That's it. So that is PJM in a nutshell. Now, I know, listen, I did not do it justice, nor could I ever do it justice in 20 minutes. As I said, it is a complex kind of operation, and we stand ready to give you all 6 hours if you like. I certainly want to offer up further conversations. If you like to talk to me, you can reach me through Gwen if you like, or I can be reached at Evelyn, EVELYN .Robinson, ROBINSON at PJM.com. I want to say thank you for your time, and I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Evelyn. That was a great presentation. Questions? Dale, let's start with you.
Evelyn, I commend you. That was nice. That was excellent. And that was greatly done. And I feel highly accurate. And like you say, it's interesting how the conversation is changing. And you're correct. I've been working with a lot of farmers and local government leaders. I've been hearing a lot about NIMBY and bananas, and we don't want this, or why do we need that, and different things. And when you start discussing, well, that's great, are you going to volunteer to be the first community basically to go through a rolling blackout if we don't have those resources for delivery? And they're going, what are you talking about? People are finding out that we need to be part of this discussion. Huge upgrade and refit of the entire structure is going on this early part of this century. And we need to do planning and we need to accommodate. And we want to make sure basically power generation is there, working with PJM and others, accommodating technology in some way, shape, or form to ensure that happens in the local neighborhood. That was the focus of what I've said and what you heard at the beginning of that. It's amazing. The last time we started talking about resource allocation was about 20 years ago, around 2000, 2001. How are we going to address this issue in the future? We are in that right now, and those discussions have to go forward. And I really appreciate your presentation here.
Thank you, Dale.
Evelyn, I had a question. One of the things I wasn't aware of was that PJM's a nonprofit. And you were showing the distribution regions of PJM as far as making sure the electricity gets to where it needs to go. So I guess what would be the PJM equivalent on the West Coast, and is it also a nonprofit?
So generally speaking, most of these, yes, it would be the California ISO, California Independent System Operator in California. There's a great big portion of the West that does not have the PJM equivalent. There are a number of companies that are looking to be that, including California, trying to expand beyond California. In the Midwest, there's an organization called the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO. In the Southwest, there's the Southwest Power Pool, and there in Texas, there's called ERCOT, Electricity Regional Council of Texas, something on that line. ERCOT is not part of the Eastern Interconnection, and you might remember in Uri, there were a lot of outages in ERCOT and even some death. Part of that is because ERCOT is not interconnected like the Eastern Interconnection, and you couldn't get power to them. But yes, there are 9 organizations in North America like PJM, but we are the largest.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay.
Well, I have a question. I certainly hope that Gwen will send me Dale's contact information, and I certainly want to highlight that if you need more information about the energy or PJM, it certainly would. I'd be happy to help. Dale did raise a very important comment indicating that your voices have to be heard. Obviously the PUCO has listening sessions. They're called public hearings. I know the Power Siting Board does. And PJM has what we call a public interest environmental organizations users group that is basically required to meet with our board of managers at least once a year to put out their concerns, because generally they don't have enough resources to participate in the PJM processes on an everyday basis. There are some very big organizations that are part of it. Sierra Club, NRDC, the Ohio Consumers Council is part of the PIU, as well as any other consumer advocate in the PJM footprint. But there's certainly a way for you to participate if you would like to. And I'm open and happy to be able to take that. The other thing I'd like to note is that Dale was talking about the importance of your input and your voices. FERC, our federal regulator, has created an Office of Public Participation, which is designed to make sure that they have a grassroots kind of understanding of what is going on in the entire country. So there are some ways to be heard. And there are a number of grassroots kind of efforts that are being undertaken to make sure that the residential voice is being heard loud and clearly.
Well, thank you, Evelyn. And Gwen, please send her my contact information and things. And Evelyn, I think I recognize you because you were with the Ohio Consumers Council, and I think we worked very closely with each other there a few years back. It's nice seeing you again.
It's nice for you to say a few years back. Dale, as opposed to how many years it really was.
Oh, well, no, I understand that.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate this invitation, and I hope you will come back, invite me back.
Thank you,
again.
Evelyn.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna stop the recording.